Many of you know I did the big NFL study when the NFL was sort of struggling with traumatic brain injury and football, but I just saw so much pain in retired players' families that I knew I had to do something. But we're not talking football tonight. It's not a big topic for us. We're going to talk about grief and loss. And I know they're feeling it in Kansas City, but quite frankly, people are feeling it all around the world. And our older population, some of you think I'm in that group. No. Our older population is suffering more than I can remember them ever suffering because of the isolation and the loneliness. And the younger population is suffering more than ever. In my house, I have an 11-year-old, almost 16-year-old, and a 17-year-old. And last year, this year, they've lost a lot. And it's critical to know how to deal with it. I was on Headline News today, CNN Headline News. I was really fun with my friend Lynn Smith. We were talking about my new book, Your Brain is Always Listening. It is coming out March 2nd. And in the book, I talk about what your brain is always listening to. And I use the metaphor of dragons. The first section is dragons from the past that still breathe fire on your emotional brain. And we've talked about a herd of dragons so far. But tonight, we're going to talk about the one that just bites people so often, and that is the grief and loss dragon. All the dragons, I had an artist render them for me. And it's more complicated than most people think. I mean, yes, when I lost my dad last May, partly because of COVID, I mean, there was just such sadness associated with that. And that's what people often think when they think of grief, that you lose a spouse or a parent or a child or a loved one. But there are three big categories to grief. You lose someone important, like death or a separation or a divorce or a breakup or a friend or a peer group, a partner that has dementia, they don't recognize you anymore. You lose children. Now, the worst thing is losing a child to death. But when you have an empty nest, that's a loss. And so many patients that I've treated over the years, I mean, they actually can get depressed when they experience that loss. And Tana, my wife, is just a great mother. She has been a great mother. And one of the reasons I think she's great is she caused Chloe to be very independent. And she doesn't need her as much at 17. And that's sort of the point. I mean, that's what you want to do. But I could just see the sadness and the grief. You might lose something important. So the first category is someone important. The second one is something important, such as your health. So women with breast cancer who've had a mastectomy. I was an Army psychiatrist for a long time. If someone lost a limb, a job, finances, even a beloved pet, I have seen severe grief reactions. And, it's like, well, why? It's like my dog Aslan loves me virtually no matter what. I can't say that about anybody else in my life. And so having that kind of love and attachment is so important. So someone important, something important, or you lose the attachment to an idea, to what could have been, to your identity, such as with retirement. Or you lose a loved one to an addiction, or if you have a handicapped child, that you had this hope for your relationship with this child, and it just takes a complete right turn. I also see this a lot with the athletes and musicians and actors and actresses that I've seen, that they lose the trajectory of going toward a goal. And if they don't make new goals, they often get lost in themselves. And what can trigger grief and loss? Any reminder of the loss, a sight, a song, a routine, making coffee in the morning, an anniversary, anything. Today's Sunday. Sundays often trigger loss for me because for the last 5 years, virtually every Sunday, I went over to my dad's house and he and I worked out together. We lift weights, and he was almost 91 when he died. He could do a plank longer than I could. It was irritating. I mean, seriously irritating. I'd like go, let's do a minute. And he'd go, let's do 2. I'm like, okay. He goes, let's do 4. And I'm like, oh no. He could do a 6-minute plank at 90. It's pretty weird, actually. But every Sunday, or every time I do a plank, I think of him. And early on, it was a lot of pain for me. And so how do we react when we experience grief and loss, or when the grief and loss dragon breathes fire on our emotional brain? Well, it can be shock, anger, sadness, guilt, numbness, anxiety, insomnia. I remember when I lost someone, it was about 16 years ago. I mean, someone I really cared about. And she went away. And for like 6 months, I was completely not normal. Probably most people know me go, well, he's sort of never normal. But I wasn't myself. I couldn't sleep. I had chest pain and diarrhea. It was just like my whole nervous system was out of whack. And that's how people react. It's like your brain is still looking for something that's not there. Loneliness, physical stress symptoms, and chest pain is very important to get assessed. So I had chest pain when I went through that period of grief, and I went to the cardiologist and my heart was just fine. What happens with grief, it's a different kind of stress that causes your ventricles, one of the chambers of your heart, actually, two of the chambers of your heart, to beat erratically. And that's what causes the chest pain. But my heart was fine. My assistant, who I adore, Kim, while she's working with me, her fiance died of a heart attack in her arms. And she had crushing chest pain. And my first thought was, it's grief. But the first thing I said is, it's probably grief. You need to go to the cardiologist. Well, we actually found out she had 95% blockages in her coronary arteries. His death likely saved her life. And so if you get chest pain, it's really important to get it assessed. And the chronic exposure to cortisol, stress hormones, actually shrinks the cells in your hippocampus, one of the major memory structures of the brain. And so having memory problems during periods of grief and loss are very common. So what to do? How to tame the grief and loss dragon? Let's talk about 7 things. 1, you want to start healing as soon as possible. I knew when my dad died, I wasn't just going to feel bad for a long time. I was going to feel bad. In fact, I sat, this is in my office, in the chair I write in, and I just played his voicemails. And I played them over and over again. I wanted to feel how much I loved him, how much he loved me, the sadness. I wrote him for his funeral. I wrote a poem that's actually, I put it in the book. I won't go over with you, but it's beautiful. Get the book. So start as soon as possible, number 1. Number 2, brain health, right? I'm already talking to you about how stress chemicals can damage your brain. You need to get on a brain healthy program. Too often people are feeling bad. They're smoking pot. They're drinking alcohol. They're eating a lot of sugar. They're doing things to medicate themselves that actually make them worse and perpetuate the problem. And I sent a note to my team today about Tom Brady. So, Tom Brady, greatest of all time, quarterback, 10th Super Bowl, just won his 7th Super Bowl or something crazy. I'm not a fan of football, but I'm a huge fan of Tom Brady. Because if you actually look at his routine, the New York posted a headline story of his insane routine. He's basically a brain warrior. He does everything right except football. And that's why, despite being 43, he is still the best quarterback in football. I mean, it's crazy, right? So if you're going to be in a stressful environment, step number 2 is get your brain right. Do the things, focus on exercising, eating right, taking your supplements, new learning. Do not give yourself permission to get off track. I have a great story that I've put in one of my books, Use Your Brain to Change Your Age, about Chris, who lost her 12-year-old daughter, Sammy, to bone cancer, and then just felt terrible and got depressed, started drinking too much, ate the wrong food, went from 130 pounds to 200 pounds. And on the 2-year anniversary of Sammy's death, she was going to kill herself. And then she saw me on TV, and I was talking about brain health. And she said, well, I'll get his book. And if it's a bad book, I'll kill myself tomorrow. She actually told me that. It just horrified me. And, but she realized she was doing all the wrong things. So she stopped drinking. She stopped eating bad food. She got on her tennis shoes. She started walking. Then she started running. And over the next year, got down to her normal weight, felt better. Of course, she's always going to miss Sammy. Of course, I'm always going to miss my dad. But hurting myself isn't helping anybody. Step 3, fix sleep first. So important. If you don't sleep right, you won't grieve right. If you don't sleep right, you won't think right. If you don't sleep right, you won't make the right decisions. And really take some time and focus on getting the sleep you need. And that does not mean Ambien. That is not a good strategy. Hypnosis, meditation, BrainMD makes something called Put Me to Sleep. We also have restful sleep. There are supplements that can help: magnesium, theanine, GABA, a little bit of melatonin, not a lot, a little bit of melatonin. Number 4 is journal. What happened if you're having trouble getting beyond grief? There's research that says just writing about it 15 minutes a day after a couple of weeks, significant improvement. The idea is do something. Number 5, be on an alert for an ant infestation. Those of you who follow my work, I talk about automatic negative thoughts, the thoughts that come into your mind automatically and ruin your day. And your brain is always listening. There's a big chapter on how to kill the ants that are feeding the dragons. Here's the exercise. Whenever you feel sad or mad or nervous or out of control, write down what you're thinking. And then ask yourself, is it true? Can I absolutely know if it's true? So helpful. 6 is deal with the triggers. Be on guard for them. And when they come, let the feeling wash over you and then change it. You don't have to stay in sadness. And I have a new course coming out called Overcoming Anxiety, Depression, Trauma, and Grief, and talk about my friend Joseph McClendon, who has a 4-step process to break bad feelings quickly. Practice feeling bad. Like, go to the darkness. I feel the sadness over my dad. And then say, stop. I mean, once you've dealt with it, but you don't, I call it interrupting unnecessary unhappy moments. Say stop. Stand up, take a breath, gives you some space, and then replace it with a happy moment. Like after I did one of my shows, my dad called me and said he was proud of me. And that was not a common thing. As accomplished as I am, expressing love was sort of rare. But I cherish that. I hold on to that. And then celebrate. It's like, yes, I don't have to feel bad. I can interrupt unnecessary, unhappy moments. Keep your memory balanced. Too often when we lose someone or something, we over-idealize them. I saw my grandmother do this to my grandfather. I loved my grandfather. I was named after him. He was my best friend when I was growing up. He was a candy maker. I mean, I was attached. But my grandmother was sort of mean to him. I wasn't a fan of her. And when my grandfather died, she just went on and on about how wonderful he was and how much she missed him. And I'm like, you want to keep it balanced. And the bonus strategy you're still struggling, get help. Sometimes grief and loss can get stuck in your brain. So I've actually published scientific studies on how trauma gets stuck in the brain, and grief often becomes traumatic. And there are treatments that can help. Now, for me, I don't just reach for, take this or that medicine, but supplements like happy saffron or serotonin mood support can often be very helpful to you. So I hope you're finding this helpful. You can also order my new book, Your Brain is Always Listening, if you go to yourbrainisaliwayslistening.com. And if you pre-order it, I'm actually giving away a free bottle of happy saffron, along with some other wonderful gifts. So I hope you have a great night. If you're struggling with grief and loss, use some of these tips. I know they can be helpful to you. Take care.
Your brain is always listening. I am thrilled to be your guide and show you how to tame your dragons so that you can have the happiness, peace, and the relationships you deserve.
In my new book, Your Brain is Always Listening. The first part is about the dragons from the past that breathe fire on your emotional brain. And one of the most common dragons during the pandemic is the hopeless and helpless dragon. And this is a dragon that is running wild around the earth. The depression was already at epidemic levels before the pandemic happened, and it was at about 8%. Typically, the 40 years I've been a psychiatrist, it's been around 6% of the population at any point in their life struggled with depression, but it had been sneaking up. And when the pandemic hit, just a couple of months later, it was at 28%.
Well, and we've got teenagers in the house, and like not just ours, but I mean, they struggle with it off and on, but their friends, like almost all of our daughter's friends have struggled with depression. It's really hard.
And
come closer to me so we can see you.
The boss dragon. Right here.
I like that. I want a t-shirt that says Boss Dragon.
Oh, we're having dragon puppets made.
I want Boss Dragon for mine.
Boss Dragon.
Yeah.
That would be
Dragon Queen, not Queen of Dragons, but Dragon Queen.
And that would be correct.
Yeah.
So with all the dragons, we talk about their origin story. So you know how this dragon sort of bit you in your early 20s. And there's a term that I really love from my friend Seligman on learned helplessness.
Right.
And what that means is you try to feel better and it doesn't work. And you try to feel better and it doesn't work. And you try to feel better and it doesn't work. And pretty soon you say to heck with it. You stop trying. You actually learn that you're helpless or learn that you're hopeless.
Yeah, it's funny how but families are so different, and how some people don't stop trying and some people do.
And part of it depends on their brain function.
Yeah, and I wonder how much of it's genetic or modeled.
Well, I think it's all, right? We always talk about the 4 circles, that there are biological factors associated with depression. So genes would be one, but head trauma would be another. Toxic exposure, mold exposure, all of those things can contribute to depression. But there are also psychological causes where you don't know how to manage your mind. There's social causes if there's a pandemic.
Or modeling.
If
would that go under social?
Social could go under modeling, that people handled their problems by giving up.
Like your parents or.
And there's spiritual causes of depression if you are not living according to your own values, your own sense of ethics. The origin can also be you're overwhelmed by stress and conflict, that you don't believe you can have an impact on the negative situation, that your thyroid is low, right? If you have thyroid cancer and they don't replace your thyroid, what happened to you? All of a sudden, you sort of feel depressed. What triggers this dragon? Basically, anything that reminds you of when you felt powerless. And how does this dragon cause you to react? You have something called a high negativity bias. Your brain just goes to the dark place quickly.
Why are you looking at me?
Because you're pretty.
Oh. See, I thought.
that is an example of high negativity bias.
I thought you were looking at me because you were like, I do that. Oh, that was classic.
That is hysterical. It's cause people to blame themselves, to blame others. You have a lack of self-efficacy. One of your favorite terms is responsibility.
Yep.
But
My
it's
favorite
not
word.
about blame. It's about your ability to respond
It's about your
to
personal
whatever
power.
situation that you're in. People respond to this dragon with depression, powerlessness, helplessness, social withdrawal, giving up easily. This is the dragon most closely associated to suicide. So how do you tame?
I remember being so depressed and thinking, life is too hard. It's not supposed to be this hard. There's no point. It's a really awful, dark, ugly place to be.
So how did you get out of that? Besides meeting
it was
me?
a very long process, but I'm just.
You actually shared that
in my book. Yeah.
Your book, which now has 57 reviews on Amazon. It's like rated 4.8 out of 5. It's a great book. I know I've been saying it. You're going, but you're her husband. What would happen if you didn't say it? You're married to a redhead. Lord knows what would happen. Anyways, it's a great book. Good.
Thank you.
I'm very proud of you. All right. So how do you tame? That's sort of the point of all of this. If you've been struggling with depression. So we take this 4-circle approach. Did you know there is a linear correlation between the number of fruits and vegetables you eat a day and your level of happiness? So first thing, you want to get your diet right. Tana's written a great book. It's been a really great seller for a long time. The Brain Warrior's Way cookbook. Every recipe, gluten-free, dairy-free, corn, soy, artificial dye, preservative-free, but they taste great.
So that, speaking of which, the Brain Warrior's Way, that was part of it, was beginning to identify when I felt my weakest with being a warrior. Was like, what is the opposite of me right now? Because this isn't working. What's the opposite of me? And it's a warrior. So someone who's, strong, who's always training, who's prepared, who's, doesn't give up. That's when I sort of adopted that idea of trying to focus on something that was different than I was.
So mindset is really important, but under the biological circle, diet, critical, exercise, head to head against antidepressants, walking like you're light for 45 minutes, 4 times a week, found to be equally effective. Omega-3 fatty acids, head to head against Prozac in a study from New Zealand, more effective. And so exercise, lots of vegetables, colorful fruits and vegetables, omega-3 fatty acids. I'm a huge fan, as all of my family is here, of Happy Saffron, something we make at Brain MD, saffron, zinc, and curcumins, all scientific evidence it can boost your mood. Well, how simple is that? And if those things don't work, then antidepressants for sure can be helpful based on your brain type. Everybody's brain is different. Psychological circle, something we call positivity bias training. Tana was on the doctors last Friday. You can probably find the clip online. I was so proud of her. She did a great job. And she talked about positivity bias training. So you might want to talk about it.
So our brains are hardwired to focus on what's bad, to focus on what's scary, what's threatening, especially if you grew up in a traumatic environment, right? It's what kept you safe. We've got those spidey senses, the spidey senses that protect us. But they also can ruin your day if that's all you're focusing on, if you're constantly focusing on the negative. So when you focus, positivity bias training is really simple. It sounds really simple, and it is really simple. It's you wake up in the morning and you start training your brain to focus on what's positive. And you can say, today is going to be a great day. Or in my case, I like questions. Why is today going to be a great day? Because then my brain starts searching for why today is going to be a great day. Your brain doesn't have a sense of humor at all. Like, it just does what you tell it to do. It tries to. So if you say, why is today going to be a great day?
All the time.
Yeah, but that's not my brain. That's just me laughing. So, but if you ask the question, why is today going to be a great day? Then your brain is going to start working to try to figure it out. And it sounds overly simplistic, and it actually is. But then at the end of the day, we get together at dinner with the kids, and we always ask, so what went well today? And as simple as those two questions are, by answering them, that simple act of answering them in the morning and at night, you begin to, it's not like you're going to lose your spidey sense. It's not like you're going to lose your ability to notice what's wrong. Trust me on this, as somebody who does that. But you begin to now be able to focus on what's good also, because that's not our nature.
It's not our nature. Also, when you get depressed, your mind goes to what's wrong. I actually want you to write out a list of your strengths and your accomplishments. I think that's so important. I learned early on as a psychiatrist, I can make anybody cry, I can make anybody feel bad by getting to focus on their failures and their fears and the times they didn't, perform or act the way they wanted to. And but I would never leave somebody there. I always want to know what went well. Tell me about the best parts of your week. And I have all of my patients write down their top 20 happy moments. Socially, there's actually a treatment called interpersonal psychotherapy. It's been found to be as effective as antidepressant medication, is work to make your relationships better. You are clearly an antidepressant in my life. and it's work, right? I mean, we both work at having a good relationship. We know what we want: kind, caring, loving, supportive, passionate relationship. And we supervise the things that come out of our mouths.
And the more you do it, the easier it gets, like anything else, like working out, or, it's a discipline.
So important. And we have control. Like, I totally know how to make her angry at me, and I choose not to do it.
Thank God.
I totally
Thank
know
God you choose
what
not to
makes
do it.
her happy. I make her a latte in the morning. I make her smoothie. A little bit later, I'm going to make her brain healthy hot
Do you
chocolate.
see this pattern here?
We serve each other.
Yeah.
Right? Because our relationship is important, actually. More important now that the 17-year-old's going off to college. And I'm going from number 2 in the family to number 1. I always feel like Avis. Try harder.
Oh, stop it.
And then there's spiritual treatments for depression. If you read Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning, that living with meaning and purpose is an antidepressant. Plus, you live longer. So what movies does the hopeless and helpless dragon like? Movies that fit your negative mood, like The Joker, or $1 Million Baby, Schindler's List, What Dreams May Come. One of my favorite movies with Robin Williams, or The Green Mile.
Oh, The Green Mile was great.
Movie. If you're struggling with depression, it is one of the most treatable illnesses. If you try these simple things and it's not working for you, call the clinics. Go to amenclinics.com, amen like the last word in prayer, clinics.com. It is one of the most common, it's the most common reason people call us, and we are very effective. But in order to treat depression properly, you got to get your brain right, your mind right, your relationships, and your deepest sense of meaning and purpose. We hope this is helpful. And if you order my new book coming out March 2nd, Your Brain is Always Listening, and you go to yourbrainisalwayslistening.com, we have 4 free gifts, including a coupon for a free bottle of Happy Saffron. See you soon.
Thanks.
Tonight, what we're going to talk about is the Ancestral Dragon. Are your issues not your issues? That they're actually from another generation. I had good news today. I got my first real hardcover copy of Your Brain is Always Listening, and we got a note from the New York Times that they're tracking it to potentially be a bestseller. So I would dearly love if you helped that along. If you go to Your Brain is Always Listening, pre-order the book. I have 4 amazing gifts for you, including a coupon for my favorite supplement, a bottle of Happy Saffron. But that's not why we're here. Why we're here tonight is to talk about the Ancestral Dragon. Isn't he cute? This is my favorite of all the dragons. And you know you have the Ancestral Dragon if you have symptoms and you have no idea why. That these dragons can come up for ancestor issues. So unresolved issues passed down by your mother, your father, your grandparents. So think of Holocaust survivors. Now we're going to have pandemic survivors. We're actually writing this stress in our genetic codes that literally can affect 2 or 3 future generations. That's why it's so important to get your brains right and your minds right to manage the stress that has been literally assaulting us for 11, almost 12 months. They can come from genetic vulnerability. There's actually epigenetic issues. I have to tell you about this study. It just blew my mind when I first found this study. So they took mice and they made them afraid of the scent of cherry blossoms. Now that's not hard to do. You take mice, you give them a mild shock whenever the scent of cherry blossoms in the air. It's Pavlovian conditioning. But what they discovered will blow your mind. Their babies were afraid of the scent of cherry blossoms, and their grandbabies were afraid of the scent of cherry blossoms. So if you have unresolved fears and phobias that develop during your life, you may pass them on if you don't figure out how to deal with them. In the book, I tell 2 ancestral dragon stories. One, my wife, she's on with me a lot because I adore her. her grandmother grew up during World War I in what is now Lebanon and Greater Syria during the Great Famine. And they had no food. And she got lost in the mountains. The Turks would come and raid that area of Syria. And everybody scattered, and she ended up getting lost in the mountains for 3 days. When they found her, her hair was actually frozen from the water she'd fallen in, and they had to shave her head. That trauma, that deprivation got written into her genetic code, and she suffered a lot in her life with anxiety, depression, even some psychotic episodes. But my wife was ready for the pandemic before the pandemic. And I used to always give her grief about, why are you spending money on things we'll never need, like toilet paper? It's like the store, when is the store ever going to run out of toilet paper? I can never again tell her no. But the trauma from her grandmother had actually been written in her genetic code, leaving Tana always worried that some bad thing was going to happen. When my grandfather first came to this country, again from the Middle East, he was a teenager, and his brother borrowed his sister's car, and apparently his brother wasn't a very good driver, and ended up in an accident where he was killed in a collision with a train in Los Angeles. So my grandfather's 19 when this happens. He's so angry. He's so upset. He never drives again. And this happened before he made my dad. And that anxiety, because when I was a child, I had anxiety. I have 5 sisters. I mean, that'll make you anxious. But that got written in his genetic code. So what is written in your genetic code? And I didn't know that story until just a few months before my dad died, because as I was working on Your Brain Is Always Listening and really thinking about the Ancestral Dragon, I'm like, I need to know all about my dad and all about my grandpa and all about my grandmother. My grandmother was actually an orphan. She was raised in a convent in Bethlehem. The ancestral dragon can also come with cultural expectations. The triggers for this dragon, it's often unknown. If you don't know your family story, even back to 3 generations, you might not know. Someone in the chat said it didn't start with you. It's a great book. It's a book I read. And we had Mark Wolin, who wrote the book, on our Brain Warriors Way podcast. So if you go to brainwarriorswaypodcast.com, you can actually see nearly 1,000 podcasts Tana and I have done together. And we did 4 of them on It Didn't Start With You. It's often triggered as parents when you were the age that your parents or grandparents had trauma. And I tell a story in the book about a woman I was treating who just couldn't sleep by herself. And it turned out, and that started in her 20s when her mother was raped in her 20s, and then really never slept well. Thinking, it can be triggered when you think what you should do to make your family proud or make them accept you. And how does the ancestral dragon cause you to react? Anxiety for like little or no reason, out of the blue. Sometimes rebellion, where you're going to rebel against cultural expectations, or you feel guilty or as though you are a disappointment to others. So how do we tame this dragon? You got to know your family history. I think family history is just so important. You know, at Amen Clinics, when we do a history on people, we just don't start at your birth. We want to know about your mom, about your dad, about your grandparents, what runs in families. Very important. It's important genetically to have a good idea. I recently scanned an 18-year-old girl, and I ended up scanning her mom and her dad to see where the patterns in her brain came from. So I've done hundreds of 3 and 4 generational scans. So know your family history. Talk to your parents if they're still alive, or is there a family historian? Ancestry.com can actually be very helpful. Visualize your parents, grandparents, and see if their issues often relate to your issues. And you want to work consciously to separate your issues from theirs. It didn't start with you. It's a great book by Mark Wolin. The movies this dragon likes, Braveheart. Love that movie. Gandhi, Saving Private Ryan. Glory, The King's Speech. And for each of the dragons. So I'm just getting through part 1. There are 5 parts in this book, so I'm going to be back. We're going to start talking about the they, them, and other dragons coming up in my nightly chats. But for each of the dragons, I also have meditations or affirmations. Now, you can know your dragons by free quiz, knowyourdragons.com, and I'll give you a report. And the average number of people, we've had like 5,000 people take this, is 6. So people often have more than one. Tana had 10 of them. So the affirmation is, I appreciate and honor my ancestors. That's the first one. The second one is, sometimes my anxiety may not be from my lifetime, but another lifetime. I work to live in the present and for the future. So understanding the past is really important. But you don't want to live there. There's a special section in here, and beware the dragons from the past tend to resurface when you have children. If you had a dragon born when you were a child, when your child is the age that dragon was born, they often breathe fire on you again. So if you got teased in kindergarten, when your child goes to kindergarten, your wounded dragon might all of a sudden show up. Anyways, I hope you're enjoying these. I enjoy bringing them to you. Card cover. Your Brain is Always Listening, coming out March 2nd. But if you pre-order it before March 2nd, I have 4 free gifts for you. One is a playbook to help summarize the major concepts in the book, and you can download that right away. There's 6 hypnosis audios I do for my patients. It's a program I created called Magnificent Mind with medical hypnosis. Very powerful. There's a special event I'm going to do March 17th, where I'm going to answer questions from just people who pre-ordered the book, and a free coupon for my favorite supplement, a bottle of Happy Saffron. We've already given away almost 2,000 bottles. So yourbrainisalwayslistening.com. I hope you have a spectacular evening. Take care.
At Amen Clinics, we're creating a revolution in psychiatry. All other medical specialists look at the organ they treat before they treat it, but most psychiatrists never look and end up guessing based on whatever symptoms you tell them. But how do you know unless you look? Brain SPECT imaging gives us a new way to look at your brain to understand and treat your symptoms so you can ultimately know what is going on and feel better.
Hey, everybody. Happy
Thursday.
You know, have you noticed during the pandemic that days just sort of run into each other?
I have no idea what day it is, what date it is.
And then weeks, it's like, it's Saturday again.
Yep.
Oh my goodness. Or it's Monday again.
Yep.
Anyways, as we continue on our journey through Your Brain is Always Listening, we actually did all 13 dragons from the past. And so we're in a brand new section called the They, Them, and Other Dragons.
So we've got past dragons, they, them, and other dragons, and then you've got other sections.
And then we're going to do the bad habit dragons and the scheming dragons and the addicted dragons. I have a new 12-step program for you actually based on neuroscience. And I have this quote in the book. Actually, I have a lot of quotes in the book. What you think of me is none of my business.
Yeah, I use that one a lot.
Actually, it's from Terry Cole. I'm going to be on her
podcast
podcast coming up. Another one. I learned long ago never to wrestle with a pig. You both get dirty and only the pig likes it. And one more. Be kind to everyone you meet because we are all fighting our own dragons. And if you want to know your dragons, go to knowyourdragons.com. You had 10 of the 13.
I had 10. I think I'm a record so far.
No.
I'm not?
Somebody had 12.
Oh, overachiever.
They had, so in dragon terms, it's not a herd.
It's a thunder.
It's a thunder. So you have a powerful dragon, thunder. Well, today we are going to talk about the parent dragon. This is the parent dragon.
Parent dragons.
Oh my God.
Anybody else have mommy issues or daddy issues?
I think everybody in my house has daddy issues.
Yeah. Yes.
Everybody.
Yep.
Right? I mean, my dad, his favorite word when I was growing up was bullshit. I mean, can I say that? That was his favorite word. I mean, he just said it a lot. His second
that's the
favorite
thing I like
word.
that's the thing about your dad I like. So
his second,
at least your dad didn't go away.
His second favorite word was.
That's why I relate to him so much.
You don't tell me no.
No, but no is one of my favorite words.
It is.
That and I told you so.
We just had an I told you so moment.
Oh, it was about kitchen knives. Get over it.
But do you have parent issues? So I have daddy issues, no question about it. I'm the second son in a Lebanese family.
So let me tell you my only
completely
issue.
Not important.
Let me tell you my issue with the term daddy issues is that it somehow connotates or gives this impression that you are at fault and you are not. It's something that happened to you because of something that one of your parents did. So as one of the kids in our house said, I'm going to give them daughter issues. I refuse to have daddy issues. I'm going to make sure they have daughter issues.
Well, that's another dragon coming up is your children. Because you always have your children in your head, criticizing you, telling you life's not fair, you're somehow an inadequate parent, right? I mean, we all have those issues.
It's actually the one thing I don't feel inadequate about.
But you have Chloe's voice in your head. You make decisions.
Well, we all do. I do with you too.
Right. No, there's former, current, and prospective lover dragons that we are going to talk about. But tonight, we're talking about the parent voice in your head. And were you ever like me, where you promised yourself, you swore that you would never act that way toward your children? Yeah. And then when you had children, you were horrified, where you heard, you know, if you're crying, I'm going to give you something to cry about.
Well, I swore I'd never drive.
No, I didn't say that often. But the one time I did, I just like, you promised yourself you would never do that.
Yeah, I swore I'd never drive like my mom. And I'm starting to drive like her.
That's very scary.
Yeah.
So what do you do about it when you have parent issues? I mean, what you did is you scanned both of your parents. And that actually really helped you with your
Well, it gave me a lot of insight. Oh, with my dad, it was completely transformative. It healed my relationship.
You should tell the story.
Well, probably a lot of them know the story, but for those of you who don't date or marry a psychiatrist if you want to stay estranged from your family. So that's number one. So when I met Daniel and I tried to, I was disconnected from my dad, not by my choice, by his choice. He left.
Well, and sort of by your
Well,
choice.
no, it was my choice as an adult. But he left when I was a child, when I was really young, and made a lot of really bad decisions. I write about it in my book. There's a couple of chapters on my dad, but the really great chapter is titled "The Prodigal Father." It's one of the best chapters in the book because it's about I had written all of these horrible things and what I'd gone through with my dad, but then there's this turning point. And I remember my sisters called and they were all upset, my half sisters. And they were still connected to him. And they said, Dad is dying. He's got Alzheimer's disease. He's a recluse. He won't come out of his room. He won't shower. Like, he's a mess. And I'm like, what do you want me to say? Like, this is not my monkey, not my circus, right? Like, what do you want me to say? I don't even know him really. And so, I mean, that's really how I felt. And that sounds really cold and bad, but that's how I felt. It's like, why is this my problem? And so I came to you thinking you would like second my thought for being so clear about my boundaries. It was not what happened at all. You're like, oh, we have to scan him.
My monkey, my circus.
Right, your monkey, your circus. You made my family your circus, yes. So you're like, I have to scan him. And I'm like, no, we don't need him in our lives. And you're like, no, he's your dad. We have to scan him.
Yeah, and family is like really important to me.
Yeah, but you didn't know my family.
And now I do.
So when you insisted that I bring him down, and this is rich, he insisted that the dad that I hadn't seen for so long lost you for a second. He insisted that the father that I had not seen for so long actually
now it's not the whole story.
Move in with me.
No, that's not the whole story.
That's
it's just
pretty close to the story.
To get him assessed. And
where did he end up saying?
Well, but that was
for years.
So what we found when we scanned.
You notice he didn't answer.
When we scan, well, because there's a process to the story, right? You can't just get to the end, and then he died. But you can't just do that.
No. I said he lived with me. So
let's
part of my resistance was that you wanted him to live with me.
Not initially. Let's start. So, diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, a recluse, not coming out of his room. Her two half sisters have no idea what to do. And I'm like, dementia. I assess dementia all the time. One of the reasons I started scanning people is, well, how do you know if it's dementia or something else? And when we scanned him, he didn't have dementia. He had something called pseudo dementia, which is severe depression that masquerades as Alzheimer's disease. He was on a toxic cocktail of medication, and he is Tana's dad. Now, I love this woman, and I'm going to do whatever I can to be helpful. And since he was involved in making you, I at least wanted to get to know him. And when we started dating, like the first week, I introduced you to my daughter. You introduced me to Chloe, right? Chloe was 2 at the time. And so I wanted to meet him. I wanted to help him. And I found out from a physician standpoint, he's misdiagnosed, mistreated. So many people with dementia are, which is why we do imaging at Amen clinics. And then changed his medication because he's on a toxic cocktail of medication. I remember that. And put him on supplements, changed his diet. And, he's got pseudo dementia. Really, what he had is a very severe depression. So I'm not okay going, oh, well, let's just send him back to the room in, middle California where he's not coming out of the room. It's like, no, you don't do that. And so, yes, having to live
So this person that I have really awful history with now is living with me. And
so then tell them the story.
Now the good part of the story. So I had to build up the truth, the bad part of the story, the truth. So then, so literally he ends up losing 20 pounds. We put him on our program. He loses 20 pounds. He gets well. He's like, his memory is coming back. He's starting to be really active. My dad was a Baptist minister. Now, there's a whole story on that and chapter on that in my book, because that's a whole nother story. A lot of you are going, oh, why were you estranged from your dad who was a Baptist minister? It wasn't quite that simple. But he ends up now getting well and starts doing all-day seminars at the local church. So he goes from being a recluse, not coming out of his room, to now teaching seminars
with dementia
and leading Bible study in my house. And I'm like, so I couldn't trust it at first. I'm like, is he just going to go back to being the same old dad that I used to know when I was growing up? But what happened is the reason it was so transformative is because he now was better and he got better, it now gave us a chance to address the issues. I mean, we had to address those issues. He's living in my house. So that had to happen. But we addressed the issues. We now had time for this healing to happen. And he ended up dying 5 years later of something completely unrelated, leukemia. Okay. And so he died 5 years later in my arms with me praying for him. And there was this total transformation during this period that wouldn't have happened if you hadn't insisted on taking care of his brain issues first. But I had to talk about the truth of the ugliness first, because we wouldn't have gotten there.
That's why they have dramas on TV. We have plenty of drama in our life. So what's going on in your head with your parents? I mean, I still have my dad in my head. And yeah, there's the goat story is in here with the wounded dragon. And we have a public television special coming out nationwide starting February 27th. We filmed it at home, so it's our pandemic special. And we're going to talk about the dragons and the wounded dragon that, my dad gave me that one. And your dad was a wound. But, huge. But I think therapy for you was just so helpful because you have to be open to recognize the dragons and then to work on them over time. So when parent dragons are triggered and so they're triggered by when you feel like you've done something wrong or you're not good enough or supported, or sometimes you are supported by your parent dragons and motivated to work harder. What to do, what do you need to listen to or leave behind? So focus on the positive parental messages you receive and flip the rest around to use it to prove them wrong. So some of you are like me. And if somebody told you, you're like me. If somebody told you couldn't do something, you're going to have to do it.
Right.
Right. You just want to assess it, good for you or bad for you. Anyways, tomorrow we're going to talk about the sibling and birth order dragons. Now you're an only child, so people are chatting. One is like, your wife is so pretty.
Oh, thank you.
I totally concur on that. She takes my breath away, even after 15 years. So I will be back. Have a great night. Remember, your brain is always listening. Your book is called The Relentless Courage of a Scared Child. So
Story
if you
about my
want
dad, isn't it?
drama and suspense and drownings and murder
Nobody
and
drowned.
cancer.
Nobody drowned. Someone was murdered, but nobody
It
drowned.
starts with a near drowning.
Fortunately, I did not drown. I am here. Almost.
Bless you, Mom. See you soon.
Bye.
If you're enjoying the Brain Warriors Way podcast, please don't forget to subscribe so you'll always know when there's a new episode. And while you're at it, feel free to give us a review or 5-star rating, as that helps others find the podcast.
If you're interested in coming to Amen Clinics, use the code PODCAST10 to get a 10% discount on a full evaluation at amenclinics.com. For more information, give us a call at 855-978-1363.